Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I greet you in love and peace today. There is something about timing that we often struggle to understand. We live in a world that thrives on speed. We want everything fast, instant success, immediate answers, and quick solutions. But the truth is, God does not operate on our timeline. God's time is always perfect. First, we must understand that God's timing is a reflection of His purpose. This simple yet profound truth holds the key to understanding much of what we go through in life. In a world that constantly pushes us to move faster, accomplish more, and achieve everything as quickly as possible, it can be difficult to grasp the idea that not everything happens according to our schedule. As human beings, we are naturally impatient. We want things done now, if not yesterday. We measure progress in days, weeks, and months, and we don't see immediate results. We begin to doubt. But what we often fail to realize is that everything in life is governed by divine timing. The Bible is filled with examples of God's perfect timing. We see it in the lives of countless individuals whom God used for His purposes, men and women, who had to wait years, sometimes decades, before the promises of God came to pass. And yet, each of those delays served a purpose. What appears to us as a delay is never a denial in God's kingdom. Instead, it is part of a larger plan that is beyond our limited understanding. When we think of divine timing, we must first recognize that God operates outside of time as we know it. We are confined by hours, days, and years. But God is eternal. He sees the beginning and the end of everything, and He orchestrates events in ways that we cannot comprehend. To us, a day may seem like a long time, but Scripture reminds us that with the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years. And 1,000 years are like a day, 2 Peter 3:8. This means that what we perceive as a delay may, in fact, be perfectly aligned with God's greater purpose for our lives. Often we misunderstand delays as denials. We pray for things, whether it's a breakthrough in our career, a restoration of a relationship, or healing from illness, and when we don't see immediate results, we assume that God has not heard us. We may begin to think that perhaps it's not His will, or that we've been forgotten. But the truth is, God's silence is not His absence. His not yet is not in sometimes. The very thing we are asking for is not denied, it is simply delayed until the appointed time. When we look at the life of Joseph, we see a powerful example of this truth. Joseph was given a dream by God when he was just a young man. In his dream, he saw his brothers bowing down to him, a clear indication that he would one day rise to a position of authority. But what followed that dream was not immediate success. Instead, Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. For years, it seemed as though the dream God had given him was dead. But in reality, every step of Joseph's journey was preparing him for the fulfillment of that dream. God's purpose was unfolding in His perfect time, and when the right moment came, Joseph was elevated to the highest position in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. The delay was not a denial, it was divine preparation. We see this same pattern throughout Scripture. Abraham and Sarah were promised a son, but they had to wait 25 years before Isaac was born. David was anointed king as a young boy, but it was years before he actually took the throne. Even Jesus, the Son of God, did not begin His public ministry until He was 30 years old, though He was aware of His divine calling from a young age. In each of these cases, God's purpose was unfolding according to his timing, not the timeline that those individuals might have expected or desired. So why does God delay? Why doesn't he give us what we ask for right away? One reason is that God is more concerned with our growth than with our comfort. Delays often serve as a means of preparation. They allow us to develop the character, maturity, and strength we need to handle the blessings and responsibilities that God has in store for us. If Joseph had been elevated to a position of power immediately after his dream, he would not have been ready to lead a nation through a time of famine. It was through the trials and challenges he faced that he was shaped into the man who could fulfill God's purpose. Moreover, God's timing ensures that everything happens in alignment with his will. If we were to receive blessings prematurely, we might not appreciate them, or worse, we might misuse them. But when God gives us what we need at the right time, it brings glory to him and fulfills his greater plan for our lives and the lives of others. Waiting on God's timing requires faith. It requires trusting that he knows what is best for us, even when we cannot see the full picture. It requires surrendering our desire for control and acknowledging that his ways are higher than our ways and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts, Isaiah 55:9. When we trust God's timing, we are also trusting his purpose. Delays can be frustrating, but they are often the very thing that allows God's plan to come to fruition in a way that far exceeds our expectations. What we see as a setback is often a setup for something greater. We must remember that God is not in a hurry, but he is always on time. Everything that happens in our lives, every season we go through, is part of a divine process. It may not always make sense in the moment, but as we look back, we often see that the timing was indeed perfect. Another important aspect of understanding God's perfect timing is recognizing that delays often reveal deeper lessons and cultivate qualities within us that we might not otherwise develop. Patience, endurance, humility, and trust are not traits that come naturally to most people. They are refined through experiences that require us to wait. In the midst of waiting, God is shaping us, teaching us to lean on him more fully and to rely less on our own understanding. When life doesn't unfold according to our expected timeline, it's easy to become anxious, frustrated, or even doubtful of God's plan. But if we take a step back and reflect, we'll see that it is during these seasons of waiting that our faith is tested and strengthened. The waiting period is not passive, it's an active process of refining, growth, and preparation. It requires us to cultivate a deeper relationship with God, learning to listen for his voice, and recognizing that his delays are often for our benefit. Consider the process of growing a tree. You plant the seed, water it, and care for it, but no matter how much you want to speed up the process, you can't rush its growth. The tree takes time to mature, to put down deep roots, to grow strong branches. In the same way, God is allowing us to grow, to mature, and to deepen our faith so that we are ready when the time comes for us to step into the fullness of his plan. During times of delay, we may feel as though nothing is happening, but in reality, much is happening beneath the surface. Just as the seed is doing essential work underground before it breaks through the soil, God is doing essential work in our hearts, preparing us for what is ahead. Delays are never wasted time in God's kingdom. Every moment is used for preparation, even when it seems as though progress is slow or invisible. Moreover, God's timing allows for the orchestration of other events and people in ways that we cannot see. Often His plans for our lives are interconnected with the lives of others. His timing ensures that everything aligns perfectly, not just for us, but for everyone involved. There may be other people, situations, or events that need to fall into place before His purpose for you is fulfilled. His delays are often the result of working all things together for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose, Romans 8:28. What looks like a pause or a detour in our journey may be God positioning other elements in the background so that when the time comes, everything is in perfect alignment. This interconnectedness of God's timing reminds us of our place in the grander scheme of His divine plan. Sometimes our personal delays are part of a much larger narrative that involves other people, circumstances, and events. What may seem like a delay for us may be the necessary preparation for someone else's breakthrough, or it may be setting the stage for a greater purpose that goes beyond our individual lives. God's timing, therefore, is not just about us. It's about us. It's about His kingdom and His overarching plan for humanity. As we reflect on the perfection of God's timing, it's crucial to remember that God is never late, nor is He early. He is always right on time. What appears to be a delay in our eyes is often God operating with precision. When the time is right, everything falls into place effortlessly. Opportunities arise, doors open, and what once seemed impossible becomes possible. All the pieces of the puzzle come together in ways that we could never have orchestrated on our own. God's timing, then, is not something to fear or resist. It is something to embrace with trust and faith. When we understand that His timing is a reflection of His purpose, we can let go of our need for control and rest in the assurance that God knows what He's doing. The delays we face are not meant to discourage us, but to encourage us to lean in, to seek God more, and to grow in ways that will prepare us for what lies ahead. It's in the waiting that we learn to pray deeper prayers, to trust more fully, and to surrender completely. And when the time comes, when God's perfect timing unfolds, the fulfillment of His promise will not only meet but exceed our expectations. We will look back and realize that the wait was worth it, that God's timing was indeed perfect all along. Another vital aspect of God's perfect timing is how it reshapes our understanding of success and achievement. In our fast-paced society, we are often conditioned to believe that success is defined by how quickly we reach our goals, how fast we can accomplish something, or how soon we can demonstrate visible results. However, God's view of success is entirely different from our worldly perspectives. While we measure success by immediate outcomes and milestones, God measures success by the depth of our character, the faithfulness of our obedience, and the alignment of our lives with His purpose. When we are forced to wait, we come to realize that success in God's eyes is not about speed, it is about process. The journey matters just as much, if not more, than the destination. Waiting teaches us that the quality of what God produces in us during the delay is often far more important than the quantity of achievements we might desire in the short term. God's timing is designed not to rush us through life, but to ensure that every aspect of our development, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally, is carefully crafted to fit His ultimate design for our lives. Consider how Jesus operated in His ministry. He didn't rush from one town to the next, trying to perform as many miracles as possible to meet human expectations. Instead, He moved according to God's timing, stopping when necessary, resting when needed, and aligning His actions with the Father's will at every turn. Even in moments when others felt his timing was too slow, like when Lazarus was sick and Jesus delayed, going to him, his delay served a higher purpose. The delay allowed for a greater miracle, showing not only that Jesus could heal the sick, but that he could raise the dead. The waiting produced a far greater revelation of his power and glory. This is what happens when we trust God's timing in our own lives. We may have a picture in our minds of how things should unfold, but God's timing often brings about a far greater outcome than we could have imagined. What we thought would be simple blessings or achievements become extraordinary testimonies of his faithfulness. The waiting allows for a deeper work within us and for a more powerful result through us. In fact, if God were to give us everything we ask for right away, we might miss out on the greater miracles that he is preparing behind the scenes. Furthermore, God's timing helps to free us from the pressure to conform to society's expectations and timelines. So often, we feel the weight of comparison looking at others who seem to be advancing more quickly, achieving more, or living the life we desire. But when we rest in the assurance that God's timing is perfect, we are released from that burden. We no longer have to measure ourselves against the world's clock or feel inadequate because we are on a different timeline. God's purpose for each of us is unique, and his timing for our lives is specifically tailored to fulfill that purpose. This perspective not only brings peace, but also restores joy in the journey. Instead of rushing from one goal to the next, constantly feeling the need to prove ourselves, we can embrace the season we are in with contentment. We begin to appreciate the growth that happens in the waiting and the wisdom that comes with patience. The process becomes just as valuable as the outcome, because we are not simply waiting for a promise to be fulfilled. We are being transformed into the kind of people who can carry that promise with integrity and grace. God's timing also works to protect us. Sometimes we are not ready for what we are asking for, even though we believe we are. There are moments when God's delay is a shield, preventing us from stepping into something prematurely and harming ourselves in the process. We may think we are prepared for the blessing, the position, or the opportunity, but God, in his infinite wisdom, knows better. He sees the dangers we cannot see and understands the responsibilities we might not be able to handle just yet. By delaying certain things, God ensures that when we do step into what he has for us, we will be equipped to sustain it and flourish in it. This protective aspect of God's timing is often difficult to accept, especially when we feel desperate for change or for something to happen in our lives. But as we mature in our faith, we begin to trust that God's not now is as much an expression of his love as his yes. Delays may feel like frustrations to us, but in reality, they are part of God's safeguard to prevent us from experiencing failure, burnout, or setbacks that we are not yet prepared to handle. Ultimately, God's timing is a reminder that he is sovereign over our lives. We can plan, strategize, and work hard, but it is God who orders our steps and determines when things will come to pass. Proverbs 16:9 says, "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." This doesn't mean we should abandon our plans or goals, but it does mean that we should hold them loosely, recognizing that God's timing is not something we can control. Instead of resisting the waiting, we learn to embrace it as part of God's perfect process. As we do, we find that his timing not only fulfills his promises, but does so in a way that is far more beautiful, purposeful, and perfect than anything we could have arranged on our own. Another essential truth about God's perfect timing is that it teaches us to live in total dependence on Him. In a culture that celebrates independence and self-sufficiency, waiting on God can feel counterintuitive. We are often taught to take matters into our own hands, to push through obstacles, and to create our own opportunities. But God's timing requires us to relinquish control and trust that He is working even when we cannot see it. It challenges us to step back and recognize that our lives are not solely in our hands, but are guided by a higher power who knows far more than we do. When God delays, it is an invitation to lean more fully into Him. The waiting period becomes the time to deepen our relationship with Him, to seek His face, and to understand His will more clearly. Rather than rushing ahead and trying to force things to happen on our terms, we learn to rest in His presence and allow Him to guide our next steps. This dependence on God brings us to a place of humility, where we acknowledge that we do not have all the answers, nor do we need to. It is in this place of surrender that we experience the peace that comes from knowing that God's plans are greater than our own. We see this kind of dependence model throughout the Bible, particularly in the life of King David. Before he became king, David spent years running from King Saul, who sought to kill him. Even though David had already been anointed as the future king of Israel, he did not try to take the throne by force. He had opportunities to kill Saul and seize power, but he refused to do so because he knew that it wasn't yet God's appointed time for him to reign. Instead of rushing ahead and taking matters into his own hands, David trusted in God's timing. He depended on God to bring about His promise in His own way and in His own time. David's decision to wait demonstrated not only his trust in God's timing, but also his deep dependence on God's guidance and protection during those years of hardship. In the same way, when we wait on God's timing, we are actively placing our dependence on Him. We are saying, God, I trust You to work this out in the way You see fit, and I trust that You will lead me to the right outcome. This kind of trust doesn't come naturally, it is cultivated through experience. The more we practice waiting on God, the more we begin to see that His ways are higher than our ways, and His timing is far better than anything we could plan for ourselves. Waiting also cultivates in us the discipline of prayer. When we are in seasons of waiting, we are often more inclined to seek God earnestly. The uncertainty of waiting leads us to ask for His wisdom, His guidance, and His peace. This deepens our communication with Him, and our prayers become less about asking for specific outcomes and more about seeking His will. In this process, we grow spiritually, developing a greater sensitivity to His voice and a deeper understanding of His character. Consider how Jesus, before choosing His 12 disciples, spent the entire night in prayer, Luke 6:12-13. Even the Son of God, who had perfect communion with the Father, spent time in prayer before making crucial decisions. He depended on the Father's guidance and moved only when the time was right. Jesus shows us that dependence on God is not a sign of weakness, but a mark of true strength and faith. It is the ultimate act of surrender, acknowledging that apart from God, we can do nothing of lasting value. This kind of dependence also shapes our ability to discern God's voice amidst the noise of life. When we are impatient, we often jump at the first opportunity that presents itself, mistaking it for God's timing. But when we learn to wait and depend on Him, we become more attuned to His leading. We begin to recognize that not every opportunity is from God, and not every open door is meant to be walked through. Dependence on God allows us to discern the difference between good opportunities and God-ordained opportunities. It keeps us grounded, ensuring that we are moving in alignment with His will rather than being swayed by impatience or pressure from the outside world. Moreover, dependence on God during times of waiting reminds us of His faithfulness. Every time we trust Him with our timeline and see His plan unfold, we are reminded that He has never failed us. His track record is flawless. This growing awareness of God's faithfulness strengthens our trust in Him for future seasons of waiting. We begin to build a history with God moments when we waited and saw His perfect timing bring about outcomes that were beyond anything we could have achieved on our own. This history becomes a foundation of faith that we can rely on during future challenges and uncertainties. In essence, God's timing teaches us to shift from a mindset of self-reliance to one of divine dependence. It reminds us that while we are responsible for making wise decisions, ultimately it is God who orchestrates the course of our lives. When we wait on Him, we are demonstrating that we trust Him to be our provider, protector, and guide. We stop striving in our own strength and start resting in the assurance that He is in control. This kind of dependence not only brings peace, but also positions us to receive God's best for our lives, for His timing is always aligned with His purpose and His love for us.